Hello and welcome to the D365 Insights podcast brought to you by Sourcing Connect. Today's episode is Transforming Finance at Scale, a platform housing story with Craig Barber at Future of Finance Consulting. Hello, Craig. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. Can you
Good morning.
please give Good morning. Can you please give our listeners a brief introduction to yourself and Future of Finance Consulting?
Yep. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Been looking forward to it. Craig Barber. I'm director and co-founder of Future Finance Consulting. We established myself and my business partner Nikos Kontasios. We founded Future Finance Consulting back in 2019. We're a small firm focusing on finance and procurement transformation. My background is I've worked in private sector and public sector. More recently, we've focused on not for profit, but we have got clients in the private sector as well. We cover all kinds of change and transformation activity, from operating model, service design, to pulling together roadmaps, transformation roadmaps. I head up the programs and projects practice. Nikos heads up the data report and analytics, where we can support organizations with Power BI, also SAP BI, variety of BI products, but we've got our accelerators in there, which we can offer to clients that can make the journey much faster. But we're transformation at heart, and we've got that kind of programs and projects, data reporting and analytics areas of the business where we can specialize as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for coming on. So let's get started with some questions then. So tell us a bit about how your relationship with platform housing began. What was the context and what challenges were they facing led them to reach out to you?
Sure. It was an interesting case study. Platform housing came about because the merger of Fortis Living and Waterloo Housing groups to form a large housing association, circa 50,000 units, with quite a large development part of the business as well. As part of that, bringing together those new organisations, the finance and procurement function was still struggling without those integration challenges. Looking at the legacy organisations, which again was an amalgam of other legacy organisations, and we were approached initially to do a little bit of a kind of deep dive around kind of the finance functions. There were some challenges around reporting, challenges around the month-end process. There were challenges around thinking about how best to organise teams, and there were some in-flight projects which weren't doing so well. And at the time, CFO Rosemary Farah contacted us and to discuss basically doing a deep dive and making some recommendations. And that's how things initially kind of kicked off. And we did a very intensive piece of work around November, December 2020. So a few years ago now.
Fantastic. So can you walk us through that initial deep dive? What did you uncover during the diagnostic phase and what stood out most from those early insights?
I think that we did some in-depth analysis of the month-end process. There were a number of pain points, which was useful to get into, but frustrating for platform. Chart of accounts needed some additional work, and it was clear that reporting really needed some automation. As I mentioned, service charge is a big area for kind of the housing associations, and it's complex, and it needed some further work to help it towards a trajectory ultimately towards automation, but initially kind of just getting things organized, and then a planning solution needed to be kind of was on the horizon, and really very much needed to help kind of better financial planning essentially.
Yeah, great. So how did those early findings shape the direction of the transformation that followed?
Um, yeah, so we basically issued a report in December, which issued to Rosemary and her senior team. And that basically kind of crafted out a transformation program where we made that recommendation. And we were delighted when we were asked to basically put a program together using our kind of methodology and to run a set of projects. So basically, scoping those projects out, working out the timelines to deliver, the people that were going to be required, any costs, etc. We basically put together a program of work and started to run those projects with check-ins on a 2 weekly basis, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. So you covered a lot of ground during phase two, from budgeting to service charges to business partnering. What were some of the most impactful changes you introduced during this stage?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that the the structure I think was really important. So we have our approach, our project management approach, I think was important. So we ha setting out what's to be delivered in terms of scope, timelines, and plan, and setting out those early risks meant that it really neatly set things up to be to then have those check-ins and those checkpoints. And I think that in itself was really important. And it might sound simple, but I think just having that structure and those check-ins were really important. So I think that was a building block. So actually, sometimes a lot of organizations we talk to have got ambition to change, but then you set projects up that don't really have the right structure and you can't really see clearly the progress. So that was important. But um, there was an asset management solution which was very much needed. Assets 4000 that was implemented. There was a product called Infor DPM, and I think as well, this some of these things complemented each other, and so I think budget and forecasting and the finance business partnering team coming together, a lot of this technology and some of these other changes around reporting started to really put some foundations in place, really.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I've read the case study on your website, and it says on there about reducing month end by 4 days. That's obviously no small feat. How did you achieve that, and what did it take from the team to make it work?
Yeah, so a couple of prongs to that, and I didn't just mention that in just now, in just in too much detail. But one of the key things was when you set the month end process out in a chronological order, that could be quite enlightening,
Hmm.
and particularly when you overlay the pain points. And what we did was we looked at some of those key pain points, and one thing was obvious. So the closure of the accounts payable ledger was important. So accounts payable was kept open quite late in one of the subsidiaries, and it was fairly simple observation, not so easy in practice to bring in because there were some consequences to doing that. But that was one of the key things, and there were also another couple of areas of key pain points where kind of looked at some automation. So some of the overhead allocation models, we managed to bring some automation in. We had a technical resource that basically put some modeling around that, some tooling that meant that rather than folks bashing in things, that could be automated, and we've actually further improved on that as things have gone along, and we've got some good accelerators on that to help improve the month end using this approach using BI essentially.
Yeah, fantastic. So you supported platform through system selection and then implementation of tools like Infor, Power BI, and Dynamics. How did you approach designing a finance architecture that would support their future scale?
Yeah, so I think, going back to basics is really important. So requirements are key. And the requirements were formed by helping to support the people at the coalface, the finance team, the users of the solution and the procurement solution, helping them support them to guide them to really good requirements. I think that's a really important thing. Get requirements set out clearly and cohesively. That then sets you up then to really then go to market and then put a really good tender process together, which has a compelling case to it. That's important to get vendors really geared up in the right direction. You then can select um, a solution which hits the mark. So I think those things sound obvious, but it's really important. And then that then informed about some of those conversations about Microsoft or not Microsoft, and actually platform had a hybrid approach to that in ultimate terms, with Microsoft Dynamics firmly in the frame with the finance and operations solution, but under the product, Proactis was the another it was certainly not going to be a Microsoft product at that point, although things have moved on with Microsoft P2P. So that's how we kind of approach things. The architecture was based on the fundamental building blocks of requirements, essentially.
Yeah, great. So, what were some of the key challenges you faced during procurement and delivery, technically or culturally, and how did you navigate them?
Yeah, so the big challenge is always BAU versus projects. That's the challenge we always get. Um, so there's a variety of different techniques that you can have there. Obviously, if you've got sessions and you're trying to get people to come, you can always bring some nice cakes and biscuits, but that doesn't
Always
always
a
cut
winner.
it. Yeah, doesn't always cut it though, depending on the whether you got a sweet tooth or not. But
Yeah.
um, but I think through the whole thing we had a really strong team. So it was partly future finance in as a lead in, but we did actually bring some specialists in, and they were pivotal and key as well. So I think having the right resources in the
Mm.
team that have been and done this makes it brings a sense of confidence and it helps the navigation. And I can't stress that enough. That's really important. But um, as well as those key specialists and having that organization, and obviously, you know, being evangelists of the change across the board, we had a change management work stream, which was headed up by a change management professional, to bring the toolkit. Obviously, the business bring their own, have to deliver the change and have to, understand the stakeholders really well and understand what the change is, how to land it. But I think that was really key important thing, having that change management work stream. It's not about training people on the new system, which is what people sometimes revert to. It's about, starting at the beginning, what the change is, why it's going to be good, and then that regular drumbeat all the way through. Training is very important, but that's not the
Mhm.
only thing. Help, if you get to training and people are still not sure what's going on, you really need to do that preamble and really from the top down, really start delivering those messages. So I think that was a really important building block. So I'd summarize that to be projects and program and specialist kind of pillars, and then also the change and readiness. Those are really important kind of building blocks, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you talk about how you manage change, especially during the training and hypercare period, to ensure a smooth go live?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, tooling is at the center of that. So we used Microsoft Azure DevOps, and the old days, I've kind of delivered projects where we've got spreadsheets and you're kind of hunting through the spreadsheet, looking through the last notes. DevOps is a great tool. Historically, it was always used in the system space, but we used it. We use it. Very much advocate it in the change space as well. So you've got your change actions about preparation. That's really important because that takes a lot of the heavy lifting out. Once you've set it up and geared it up, and I've gone on a journey with it myself, it really helps you to interact with all of the players involved in the project and to manage all the actions that you've defined and manage risks and issues as well. So I think that's really, really important. That fires emails off. It allows people to interact with their actions. You can chase them. Um, I'd say that's really important. I think on top of that, I think the methodology is important. So whether you're doing an agile delivery or a waterfall delivery, but you have your sprints, you structure sprints really well. But I think also, back to basics, strong project management, strong project plans, and having gates, strong gates really through there. But the going back to the change management approach, having your business readiness plans by business area, you're taking your change impacts. So the key things that are going to change, which are high and significant changes, making sure that you've really got those on the radar and you're attending to them. Because if you don't attend to those well, first of all, identify them, but then work with the business and any other corresponding business customers If one example of platform was that invoices were emailed out, please can you good receipt this invoice because it's not been goods receipted. In the new world, in the practice solution, yeah, the business had to go into a system and self-serve and have a look and try and understand what the action they needed to take. And that's a big change. If that was blindsided, then you go live and the business were like, I'm going to say I haven't had my email for 2 weeks, what's going on. So that's a good example of your business readiness plans being granular and, landing them really well. So what's the change? Who's it affect? And how do I land it well? That's the, one of the most important things, really.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to procure to pay, manual processing of over 140,000 invoices a year is huge. How did you go about transforming the source to pay process and what changes made the biggest difference?
Yeah. And there's a few prongs to that. So as you mentioned, that's a big deal.
Hmm.
You're manually keying in with your fingers, um, 10, 12,000 invoices a month. So that's a big change. I think the scanning process was a massive change, and this isn't new, but it made a big difference. You've got there's an element of training the system on that, so it's not particularly perfectly easy. And then there's some of those things will scan in and there'll be problems with them. No purchase order, no whatever, and there's nothing to go on. So those go into query. That made a massive difference. From an effort point of view, you move the effort of the accounts payable team onto more value add activities. In an ideal world, the invoices would scan in, the goods receipt would already be made, the price matches, and they go through, and then they move into the accounts payable ledger and they get paid.
Hmm.
Clearly, there are a number of reasons why that wouldn't happen, and businesses are businesses, but moving along is that curve is important, and that can help your payment on time. So that was a big area. I think the automation of the interaction with, as I mentioned, the invoice trays and going in, that made a big difference. It was problematic at the start. I think that example I gave, whilst the change management approach was in, it still caused a bit of an issue. But
Hmm.
I think what was really important was we brought our out of the box reporting and KPIs around seeing the woods for the trees there. So um, we were able to really navigate through where the bottlenecks were. So making sure that we've got KPIs around scanning and invoices maybe going out to the uh, going astray. So if the invoice date is quite different to the current date, where have those invoices been? They must have been somewhere. The AP team dealing with queries and sending things back to suppliers, those kind of things, really important. And then having a look at the throughput and really being able to hone in very closely to create that competitive rivalry with the business so that, the business were thinking, hang on a sec, I don't want 50 invoices, in the overdue period. I want to have my invoices very low numbers and I want them to be current so that, I'm on top of things. But also as well, the suppliers are really key, particularly in this sector. If you don't pay an invoice for a repair, then there'll be Mrs. Goggins at 64 Acacia Road won't get a toilet repaired potentially. So significant ramifications in this sector, and there's also some vulnerable tenants out there as well. So it's really it was really important. But I think that reporting was transformational in its own right. Really being able to see the invoices at any point in the process and get a feel for what's going on as well.
Yeah, amazing. So were there any common sources of resistance along the way? How did you work with the team to bring them on that journey?
I think that it's always that challenge with BAU versus project. I think that pushing the change, the positives of the change is really important. So if you can connect on a basic level with how it's going to be better in the future, you know, people can then start to be more willing to invest time now because they'll get it back over time.
Hmm.
If they're not getting it and they're not connected with it, and you get this kind of audience scenario, that's when you're in trouble because you have an audience approach all the way through, and you have people in tests not knowing what they're doing because they weren't concentrating in the design phase. So I think it's that constantly reminding everybody of the benefits and constantly engaging and the touch points. And I think that DevOps gave us a really good handle on that. So we could start to see areas where if you're by conduct not engaging with delivery, then you're not going to know a lot of things. So those are kind of red flags where we could say to line managers, something going on over there, can you talk to your team member, help them to kind of just engage a bit more, whether it's workload or whatever. And I think again, I come back to that change management toolkit. That's, you know, we were able to really pinpoint, the areas of focus. There is, with all these things, we talk about tool and all the rest of it, but you've got to be able to lift people's spirits and lift people's gaze so that they're really looking at this and looking to the future and motivating them fundamentally. So, having a bit of trying to keep people's a bit of spring in their step is really important. So there's a human aspect to it as well. It's not just about chasing and all the rest of it. You got to kind of try and give people that kind of energy, kind of lift their spirits.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on to data reporting in BI, you rebuilt the chart of accounts, migrated data, and introduced new Power BI reporting. What was your approach to getting the data right and creating real value for the business?
Yeah. So the data involved here was unprecedented.
I can imagine.
So yeah, there's obviously it's complex and complex business, but the business gave us the challenge of, well, we want prior year and we want the year before and we want this budget and that forecast and we want to be able to see it all in the new system. And so that created a kind of mapping exercise from the old system, Sun, to the new system. There were also aspects on P2P, and redesign the chart of accounts meant rationalizing as well. So there was some, a, bit of a battle there with the business where they wanted to keep a more lengthy chart of accounts, and there had to be some compromises along the way, which has to level out at some point because you maybe don't make the right choices there, and you maybe need to expand some accounts out. But there was a significant rationalization, which meant that there was a streamlining of number of accounts, which makes it easier to navigate later on if you get that right. Um, Data migration, we've got our accelerators around data migration, and we were able to put those into play, which saved a massive amount of time to really identifying where there were data quality issues in the core data. So there's two types of data we're talking about here. There's master data, which is things like supplier details, and then you've got the transactional information, which is things like invoices flowing through, or in the chart of accounts, you've got the chart of accounts and some of the master data associated with that. And then you've got the transactional data in record to report in the general ledger. We were asked to migrate both of those things in some level. So we had to help with the cleansing. We then had to help with the migration, and the accelerators in the migration. I can tell you categorically saved months of work because had we not had those accelerators in place, we could have potentially been months late. It's that cycle of there's an error going back around a loop. Our accelerators basically simulate what the system wants, and it says if you load this data, it will fail, rather than loading thousands of lines of data, going in a loop, and then you have to diagnose some code in some script that says somewhere in there there's an answer to what the problem was. In addition to that, we migrated data through lots of different environments. So we took smaller data sets and we migrated them through different environments so that when we actually went live, we'd ironed out some of those bugs before. So we're actually quite confident. But the volumes, there were millions and millions of lines of data. There was a lot there. So in terms of your second point around reporting, we had a report catalog. We'd already done a lot of work with the business to kind of set out what reports they want, what they look like. And we'd already delivered some reports from the existing system, so we were able to kind of move those over. So that was important. So I think the data been cleansed and moved over, and then that safeguarded some of that from a prior period perspective. And we went live mid-year as well. So that was another complication of kind of matching the information for the first 6 months. And then started to kind of deliver those reports. And we're still working on some of the evolution of those reports. So you define what your critical go live reporting is, and then you evolve it.
Yeah, fantastic. So can you share examples of dashboards or KPIs had a tangible impact once they went live?
Yeah, I mean, I think a real significant areas around P2P. We've got the
Mm,
Procurement Act in the background, which, has put more of a spotlight on this. So, particularly around payment on time. But I think using my previous example around, invoices all the way through a process, that's important because very often organizations talk about or there's an inference that the reason I can actually remember it early in my career um, when I was working in finance and the VP of procurement came stomping up to my desk asking me why we hadn't paid somebody, and I explained to her that invoices come in, they get goods receipted, and if they price match, then they automatically go through and they get paid. In finance, we don't hold anything back. We're not kind of managing the cash, and that was true for a big, large FTSE 100 company, but it's true in most organizations. Unless you're very small, you don't massage the cash flow. It's usually the consequence of the process. So I think for platform definitely weren't managing trying to massage the cash flow. It was a consequence of the process. It was exactly that example with the lady that came to my desk. So the invoice is sitting on people's desks for 3 weeks, and if they're on 30 days payment terms, is a nightmare because then the invoice gets scanned in. As long as it's been good receipted, it's fine. But generally speaking, folks don't GRN in time. The price isn't quite right. You've got to do some level of adjustment, intervention. Maybe they don't get it right first time, and then it goes through to payment, and then it gets paid to terms. That I think was one of the most significant. I think a second area there are some additional KPI reporting that's been developed in the kind of management accounting area. And I think as well the ability, particularly with modern tools like Power BI, where you've got a landing dashboard and you drill through, and then you can toggle very quickly. It's kind of somebody described it to me as like a spreadsheet on drugs, which maybe isn't the best analogy, but you can kind of envisage that, you've got a lot of capability, is suggested by that statement. So
yeah,
um, I think those are the kind of key areas.
excellent. So the project delivered significant financial and non-financial returns. Can you break down what those benefits looked like in real terms?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the majority of the benefits were there was a lot of kind of non-financial by virtue of kind of streamline processes. Some of it is qualitative. As we
Mhm.
mentioned, some of these KPIs, it improves management decision making, but can you pinpoint it down to this implementation? That's quite difficult, but there's still benefits nonetheless. And over time, it will reap rewards. I think the proactive solution and the procurement hierarchy, and really getting better to grips with what's being bought, having more spend which is more compliant. So buying from key suppliers, which there are relationships with, buying through catalogs and punch outs. You know, that means you can really see the woods for the trees a lot more rather than randomly going around buying from organizations where you haven't got non-compliant spend means that you don't have a relationship with them, therefore you don't have discounts. So um, the P2P area was one of the significant areas of saving. So really better visibility, better tracking mechanism, and then ultimately better reporting on those constituent elements. There was a lot in the business case around that, and that will evolve. You don't get that from day one, but that you get the building blocks of data, and then you report on it, and then the catalog and the punch outs is still evolving, but that will bring more mileage because you can really see, you drive from the front end, a bit like that kind of Amazon style experience on the catalogs. Um, I think that there was some streamlining around the processes, which meant that teams could move around and do more value add rather than, like we say, bashing in invoices, those kind of things. Um, um, and then there were a few specifics around infrastructure. So when you move from a load of legacy system on-prem systems to a more cloud-based solution, there's a lot more, you can see a lot more benefit in the hardware and savings on software when you consolidate there. So those are the main areas, Sarah.
Brilliant. So, what mechanisms are in place to make sure those benefits are sustained over time?
So the benefits register was created at the very beginning, and that underpinned the business case. And those benefits are basically tracked with the links to the financials. So when they're achieved, they're kind of closed. So there's a proper tracking mechanism there with the benefit description, the detailed kind of constituent elements and milestones to that benefit and what the benefit triggers are, who the action owners are, what the dates are, and the status of implementation. So that's essential really for me, and that's part of a methodology that we would always advocate.
Great. So, looking back now, what are some of the key lessons you've taken from this transformation?
I think that, as mentioned before, the procurement activity is really significant. So,
Hmm.
getting the requirements down, doing a really compelling tender document, getting the weighting right, really getting that really crisp means that you come out the other side with, you know, good quality submissions because it's based on a good basis. And then running those sessions and then awarding is important. But I think if I go back a little bit, quite often we get approached for new systems. And I think that the preparation before the new systems is one of the most important things. So we didn't really talk about it, but Future Finance Consultant, we've got an approach around organization, or organizational or business architecture, let's call it. So target operating model. What is finance and procurement about, for example, or what is any part of the business about, for example? How does that link into the corporate strategy? How will the corporate strategy be delivered? How the teams are going to be organized? You know, what are the services going to be delivered? If you really need to set that out and then have your service design for each of those services, that's important. We did all that before the new systems were implemented, and that for me is a really good lesson learned. That kind of helps you to think, about how the service is going to be delivered and it influences the requirements. Um, I think business change and readiness is a major kind of focus point because even though we had the structure in place, we had the toolkit, whilst lots of things went really well, it's still, even with having the methodology, you still do really need to keep that really close check on that. We did have a few things going on when we went live, which we quickly got onto because we had done the work. But even you do need to have almost eyes in the back of your head, but really really close eye on that business readiness. And I think the reporting after the event, particularly on P2P, being able to see that that there's you can see where the icebergs are. So if invoices are starting to back up on the scanning side, you've got a firm view on that, and you can actually ask the AP team um, to kind of react to that. The business aren't acting on their responsibility around invoices. You can contact the business and ask them about that. I think those things that almost like the Chernobyl control room, so you avoid that eventuality, is really important post go live. I think P2P is a really significant watch area because with finance procurement, that's the biggest business area that will trip you up. And I think the final bit is around methodology and tooling. So I think, as I mentioned before, I think it would be very much more difficult if you didn't have the right tooling in place and you didn't, use something like Microsoft Azure DevOps. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. We are coming to the towards the end of the questioning now. So just a
Okay.
few more.
Yeah.
If a CFO or program manager was about to embark on a similar journey, what advice would you give them?
I think that, one of the most important things is about I would start at the beginning. What is it you're trying to achieve? So making sure that you've got in place what the finance procurement function's about, target operating model. And that doesn't need to be anything, that doesn't mean to take, years of work. That can be done fairly consistently. We've got our own templates, for example, on that. I think setting out the stall on what the finance function's about, is important. I would then go on to do the service design as well. But I think at least if you've got the target operating model, you've got a bit of a big picture vision about things. Always have a business case. Always make sure you kind of set everything out at the beginning. What's the case for change? I would always say if you've got problems, the example in phase two that we talked about earlier at platform was there was I think Rosemary called it called it out quite well. We need to do some sandbagging first. We need to stop some of this water coming in. It's an analogy really for meaning that you know we talked about the fixed asset module wasn't fit for purpose. There was a need to improve service charges, and we did some of the target operating model stuff. So actually, don't be afraid to stop some of the problems first to get some order because that can be a stepping stone on the change curve.
Yeah.
Absolutely have your tooling. Absolutely, you know, have the methodology. That's really important, and have that structure as well, that governance structure in delivery as well.
Right. So what is next for platform on their transformation journey now? So what's coming next?
So platform are engaged on a new EPM solution. It's going through the procurement phase at the moment. It's in the latter stages. That will then start to kind of get delivered. So looking more at a driver-based budgeting approach where rather than at the moment they've got a system, but actually, which is one of the things we help them to implement. So moving from spreadsheets to system was the first phase. The next phase is more business information in the system. So whether that's staffing costs or people costs and people information to jobs and asset management type information to IT projects, to IT infrastructure, having the kind of almost like take those spreadsheets into the system and build them up will bring a lot more of the operational planning into finance. So that's a key project. And then a service charge solution is a really key other project. And also some other improvements around reporting. So reporting is a journey and it's continuously improving. So, you kind of get your base report and you want more and more and you evolve really with that. And the new EPM solution will really help complement that with having that more granularity around budgets in the system. So I think they're the main things on the horizon for platform.
Great, thank you. So more broadly, what do you think the future looks like for finance transformation in housing associations or similar sectors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that more agility in transformation. I mean, I think that it's inevitable in this sector that there's going to be more mergers and acquisitions. That seems to be the way that it's going, and I think there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of kind of pressure from the government, really. I think in terms of whether it's the need to build more houses or properties, or changes in funding, which make things complex. So,
Mhm.
that that has its own challenges, both on value for money and then also on the kind of uh, the financing side of things as well. How to really kind of be more value for more money driven. So I think that what comes with that is maybe looking at new things. So looking at more kind of smart technology and AI inevitably. It feels like everybody's saying that at the moment, but I think really looking at true kind of AI capability. And I think that's where we're moving towards in terms of helping finance functions. We could be doing some more changes around the month end process. So where there are repetitive tasks, we can certainly help. We talked earlier about the allocations model, but I think looking critically at the month end process, some of those things that are pretty noddy could be automated further. So actually taking more effort out of the month end process and focusing more on the value add, the analytical analysis and the business partnering, I think is the way forward, I would say, for finance. And that goes for procurement as well, really. Think getting more data driven, doing some more AI, but really turning the dial a lot more on the visibility and the reporting side of things. I think those those two streams, I think, are where things are moving.
Yeah, definitely. So, what's the one message you'd love finance leaders listening to take away from this conversation?
I think it's really kind of plan well.
Yeah.
Know where you're what you want to do and plan well. I think those are
Mhm.
the two kind of things I would encapsulate, which are is a kind of accumulation of all the things we've discussed this morning.
Yeah, definitely. And the importance of business change. That's one of the
Yeah,
sort of key takeaways that I've got from this conversation,
absolutely.
is having the business change all the way through the project.
Yeah,
Um, so thank you so much, Craig. That's been really, really insightful. I've learned a lot as always. And thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more insights into Dynamics 365. Thanks again, Craig. And
no
yeah,
problem.
I'll see everybody and the listeners on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.